Test 1, 2, 3. Test. So, hello everyone, back to Vienna. I'm Tecumseh Fitch, and I'm going to say a few words before introducing our keynote speaker today. I want to say a bit more about cognitive science in Vienna and the theme of this year's conference, namely animal cognition or animal minds. So to start with, as you've already heard, one of the things that makes cognitive science in Vienna so unusual is the breadth of researchers, the breadth of disciplines that we include. But also another thing is that we have a lot of people working together sharing methods. And I thought I'd start with a couple concrete examples of this kind of interdisciplinary working together. And one is a project involving art historians, empirical aestheticists, and visual psychophysicists using eye trackers on people in real museums to see what they look at. Another is a project combining, working with biologists and social psychologists, doing fMRI of dogs and humans, looking at social interactions and trying to see which brain areas are activated by observing social interactions in the two different species. A third is work on EEG, and this is work together with developmental psychologists and linguists, looking at how parents and their children, both of them wearing EEG caps, synchronize their brain rhythms during speech or, I think in the future, in music. So that, I hope that just gives you a flavor of the kind of interdisciplinary work that we're doing here. So a bit about the history of cognitive science here. So this really started as a bottom-up initiative of interested researchers more than 10 years ago. But then in 2019, our university, the University of Vienna, funded the existing CogSci hub. And what we now have is shared offices, shared lab space, and shared personnel, including a secretary, lab assistants, a data scientist. So that's really a fantastic networking opportunity for us. And the hub is supposed to act as a hub, as a networking opportunity, not just for the different disciplines here at the University of Vienna, but also to extend outward to other universities in the area, including our veterinary university, the medical university, and most recently, the Central European University, which has just moved from Budapest to Vienna and has a very strong cognitive science department, and we welcome them with open arms. And there's our fearless leader, Helmut Leder, at the bottom. Okay, so much for cognitive science in Vienna. I want to say now a few words about the theme of this conference, animal cognition. Why should that be the theme of cognitive science? And to make that clear, I want to start with a bit of history about the field. So as most of you, I'm sure, know, the cognitive sciences were really born in the late 60s and early 70s with what's now called the cognitive revolution. And the sort of classic fields that were involved in this are psychology, philosophy, linguistics, anthropology, artificial intelligence, now computer science, and a little bit later, neuroscience kicked in. Sort of prominently missing there is biology. Whoops. And what brought all these researchers together was a willingness to talk about mentalistic concepts, things like memories, attention, goals, beliefs, including perhaps false beliefs, mental maps, emotions. All of these kinds of mentalistic concepts were that was the revolution, to be willing to talk about that. And you might say, well, from our perspective today, that seems crazy that it was a revolution to talk about things like ideas or beliefs. But of course, the reason this was so important is that for 3 decades before that, behaviorism had a kind of stranglehold on psychology, and behaviorism, one of the key precepts was that you don't use mentalistic concepts in that way. And here's the kind of the godfather of behaviorism, at least in the US, B.F. Skinner. And as late as 1990, Skinner was invited to give a keynote presentation to the American Psychological Society, where he said the following. He was criticizing theories about what goes on in the head or the mind, and he asked, how can you be sure that the theory is right until you can see what the theory is about? And he went on to say in the same address, as far as I'm concerned, cognitive science is the creationism of psychology. So that's 1990. I think today in cognitive science, the attendees of this conference will say, well, Skinner actually died very shortly after giving that, and as far as many of us are concerned, Skinner's ideas died with him. But there's one exception, and that's the field of animal cognition, where even today, those of us who study animal cognition and communication are kind of expected to first reject any behaviorist hypotheses in terms of stimulus response or operant conditioning before we're allowed to talk about mentalistic concepts like memories or attention. And that's, I think, the state of the art today. And our goal is to really change that. What we're trying to do in cognitive biology here in Vienna is to really build bridges between the biological sciences and the cognitive sciences. Here I've got Darwin and Konrad Lorenz, the father of ethology, George Miller and Noam Chomsky as two of the fathers of the cognitive sciences. And our idea is that this bridge should be both ways. So first of all, obviously, we in animal cognition want to inherit the freedom to talk about cognitive representations when we're discussing animal behavior, and to use cognitive representations as kind of hidden variables to explain surface behavior. And as I said, that's still a little bit tricky in our field. But we hope this can also go the other way, and we can imbue the cognitive sciences with a thoroughly biological and evolutionary perspective. And let me say a few more words about that before I end. So, in evolutionary psychology, it's very often said that we have Stone Age minds, that the human mind evolved in the Pleistocene to solve Stone Age problems. And the Pleistocene is the last 2 million years. And that, of course, is true in some sense. But our minds didn't start evolving 2 million years ago. They built on a very deep foundation that goes back much longer. So let me just give you a few examples from neuroscience where it's really not controversial. Neurons. Neurons evolved about 600 million years ago in the common ancestor of us and insects and squid. And they haven't changed that much since then. Color vision, that's something that we revel in as humans. That's something that evolved in the earliest vertebrates, the earliest jawed vertebrates, so fish, about 400 million years ago. And then, of course, our neocortex, that's something that's only seen in mammals, but it's seen in all mammals, which means it evolved something like 150 million years ago. So all of this shows that the chassis upon which human cognition was built has been evolving for a much longer period than the Pleistocene. And I think that's a really important, it's a fundamental idea really for the cognitive sciences. So let me give you two cognitive examples. So one is social bonds. So of course humans are unusual in our willingness to cooperate, and we have friendships that really matter, but that's not unique at all because, particularly in birds and primates, these same kinds of long-term friendships and cooperation, collaboration among non-related individuals play an important role in survivorship and reproductive success. So by looking at these animals, we can actually understand something about the evolutionary pressures that led to cooperation in our species. So another very different example, rules. The capacity to form a rule. I use the example of honeybees because that might be a bit surprising. Honeybees are actually able to learn the simple idea of same and different, and they can learn that in, for example, a visual context of shapes, and then apply that to colors or to odors. So in these tiny little brains with no neocortex and certainly with no frontal cortex, we can see simple rules like this. And of course, in other species, those rules can get much more complex. So I hope this gives a flavor of why cognition in animals is not just interesting in its own right, but also to inspire us and to inform us about studies of cognition in humans. So I'm hoping what this year's conference theme will do is induce everyone in the cognitive sciences to basically finally we want to exercise Skinner's ghost. So we want to talk about goals and beliefs and emotional reactions in animals. And, Skinner wouldn't like it, but I think it's finally time to exercise Skinner's ghost from the cognitive sciences.